The flames danced against the night sky, painting the Montana wilderness in an eerie glow as Faith O'Connor stood frozen at the edge of the clearing, her breath caught in her throat. The family cabin, their safe haven in this untamed territory, was now engulfed in a merciless inferno, and somewhere inside were her two younger sisters, Emma and Charlotte. It was 1876, 3 years since their father had brought them west following their mother's death, promising a new beginning in the Montana territory. Now, Faith stood alone, having returned from collecting water at the creek, watching their dreams burn away like kindling. A thundering of hooves broke through her paralyzed state as a lone rider emerged from the darkness. Without hesitation, the man leapt from his horse and sprinted toward the burning structure. Faith couldn't make out his features in the darkness, only the determined set of his shoulders as he disappeared into the inferno. "No," she screamed, lurching forward only to be driven back by a wave of heat. Seconds stretched into eternity as she watched the doorway, praying to a god she wasn't sure she believed in anymore. Then he appeared, a silhouette against the flames, carrying 11-year-old Charlotte in his arms. He moved swiftly across the clearing, laying the coughing child at Faith's feet. "Take care of her," he commanded, his voice deep and steady despite the chaos. "There's another one inside." Before Faith could speak, he was gone again, plunging back into the burning cabin. She fell to her knees beside Charlotte, who was conscious but dazed, her nightgown singed and her face streaked with soot. "Emma," Charlotte whispered hoarsely. She was sleeping. Faith squeezed her sister's hand. "A man went back for her. He'll find her." She prayed the words were true. The minutes that followed were the longest of Faith's 22 years. The roof began to collapse inward, sending a plume of sparks skyward. Just as despair threatened to crush her heart, the stranger emerged once more, this time with 13-year-old Emma limp in his arms. He staggered slightly as he reached them, lowering Emma gently to the ground beside Charlotte. In the firelight, Faith could now see his face, strong features framed by dark hair, eyes the color of a summer storm, and a jawline dusted with stubble. He couldn't have been more than 30, though the wilderness had a way of aging a man beyond his years. "She's breathing," he said, kneeling beside Emma. "Breathed in some smoke, but she'll be all right." Faith's eyes filled with tears as Emma's chest rose and fell steadily. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Isaac Vaughn," he coughed, wiping soot from his brow with the back of his hand. "And there's no need for thanks." "Faith O'Connor," she replied, extending a trembling hand. "These are my sisters, Charlotte and Emma." His calloused palm met hers, warm and sure despite the night's events. Something passed between them in that moment, a connection forged in crisis, but there was no time to dwell on it. The cabin was now fully engulfed, and the night air was growing colder by the minute. "We need to get them somewhere warm," Isaac said, already removing his coat and draping it over Emma. "My camp's not far. It's not much, but it's shelter." Faith nodded, lifting Charlotte while Isaac gathered Emma in his arms once more. As they moved away from the burning cabin, Faith cast one last glance over her shoulder at the home that had sheltered them for 3 years. Everything they owned was inside their father's tools, their mother's few precious keepsakes, the life they had built. Now it was all ash. "What brought you here tonight?" Faith asked as they walked toward his waiting horse. "This far from town, it's Providence you were passing by." Isaac's expression darkened. "Not Providence, madam, I was tracking someone." He helped her mount his horse with Charlotte in her arms, then handed up Emma before taking the reins to lead them on foot. "Been following a gang that's been causing trouble up and down the territory. Saw the fire and came running." "A lawman, then?" Faith asked, adjusting her hold on Charlotte. "Was a deputy in Helena. Now I'm what you might call independent." He didn't elaborate further, and Faith didn't press. The West was full of men with complicated pasts. They traveled in silence for nearly an hour, the glow of the fire fading behind them as they ventured deeper into the wooded hillside. Emma had woken briefly, coughing and confused, before drifting back to sleep. Charlotte remained awake but quiet, her eyes reflecting the stars above. Isaac's camp was modest, a small clearing with a lean-to shelter and the remains of a fire. He quickly rebuilt the fire while Faith settled her sisters on his bedroll, checking them for injuries beyond the obvious smoke exposure. "They both seem all right," Faith said as Isaac handed her a canteen of water. "Thanks to you." He nodded, his attention on brewing coffee in a battered pot. "Your father," he asked quietly, Faith's throat tightened, "died last winter, pneumonia. It's just been the three of us since." Isaac's eyes met hers across the fire, reflecting understanding rather than pity. "I'm sorry to hear that. It's no easy thing being alone out here." "No," Faith agreed, accepting the tin cup of coffee he offered. "But we were managing, until tonight." She took a sip, letting the bitter warmth chase away some of the night's chill. "I don't know what happened. The fire was banked when I went for water. Could have been anything. Spark from the chimney, coal rolling out." He paused, studying her face, "Or it could have been set." Faith nearly dropped her cup. Set? Who would? But she knew the answer before she finished the question. "The land." Isaac nodded grimly. "Your place sits on good water with access to the valley, valuable to the right people." "We have papers," Faith said defensively. "My father filed proper claim." "Papers don't mean much to some folks out here," Isaac replied. "Law's still catching up to the territory." Faith watched her sisters sleeping, their faces peaceful despite the night's horrors. "What do we do now?" she whispered, more to herself than to Isaac. "First light, I'll ride back, see what I can salvage." He added another log to the fire. "Then we get you and your sisters to town, and then what?" Faith asked, unable to keep the edge from her voice. "Start over with nothing." Isaac held her gaze steadily. "One step at a time, Miss O'Connor. First, we get through the night." Despite her exhaustion, Faith found sleep elusive. She sat watch over her sisters while Isaac took position at the edge of the camp, his rifle across his knees. In the quiet hours before dawn, she studied him the way he remained perfectly still, scanning the darkness with practiced vigilance. There was a story there, etched in the lines around his eyes and the set of his shoulders. A man who carried burdens silently, who knew the wilderness and its dangers intimately. When morning finally broke, pale and clear, Isaac rode back to the cabin alone despite Faith's protests. He returned mid-morning with a small bundle of items he'd rescued from the outbuildings that hadn't been touched by the fire, a few tools, some preserved food, and miraculously, the small wooden box containing their mother's locket and their father's pocket watch. Faith's hands trembled as she accepted the box. "I thought this was lost. Found it in the root cellar," Isaac explained, dismounting. "Fire didn't reach it." She looked up at him, truly seeing him in daylight for the first time. His eyes were indeed gray, but flecked with blue, and his dark hair was streaked with premature silver at the temples. There was a scar along his jawline, and his skin was weathered from years under the western sun. "What did you see?" she asked, knowing there was more he wasn't saying. Isaac checked that the girls were still sleeping before answering. "Fire was set all right. Coal oil around the foundation, and I found boot prints leading away toward Red Creek Pass." His expression hardened. 3 men, one with a limp, matches the description of Lane Blackwell's crew. The cattle baron. Faith had heard rumors about Blackwell, whose ranch sprawled across the eastern part of the territory. A powerful man with political connections in the territorial capital, he'd been expanding his holdings aggressively, sometimes through means that raised eyebrows. "The same," Isaac confirmed. "He's been trying to control water access throughout the valley. Your homestead sits on a key tributary." Faith's mind raced with implications. "You think he'll try again to drive us off?" "I think he believes he already has." Isaac began saddling his horse. "Which gives us an advantage." "Us?" Faith questioned, the word hanging between them. Isaac paused, something unreadable crossing his features. "I've been after Blackwell's operation for months. What happened to your family? It's not the first time." He secured a saddle bag with quick, efficient movements. I aim to make it the last. For the first time since the fire, Faith felt a spark of something other than despair. Perhaps it was hope, or maybe just the kindling of righteous anger. What's your plan? First, get you and your sisters somewhere safe. Then gather evidence against Blackwell that even his friends in Helena can't ignore. Emma stirred then, sitting up with a cough that drew Faith to her side. The girls' eyes were clearer today, though the terror of the previous night still lingered in their depths. "The cabin?" Emma asked, her voice small. Faith stroked her sister's hair. "It's gone, sweetheart, but we're going to be all right." Charlotte joined them, wrapping her arms around Faith's waist. "Where will we go?" Faith looked to Isaac, who had paused in his preparations to watch the sisters' reunion. Something in his gaze softened as he answered Charlotte's question. "There's a place in Junction City. Widow named Martha Reynolds runs a boarding house. She's good people, and she owes me a favor." "Junction City is 3 days' ride," Faith noted. "2 if we push," Isaac corrected. "Best place for you to lay low while I gather what's needed against Blackwell." Faith straightened, lifting her chin. "And what if I want to help? This is my fight, too." Isaac's brow furrowed. "Miss O'Connor, Faith," she interrupted. "You saved my sisters from burning alive. I think we're past formalities." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Faith, then. This isn't just about your land. Blackwell's men have hurt people, killed some. It's dangerous work." "More dangerous than watching everything we have burned to the ground," Faith challenged. "I know how to ride, shoot, and track. My father taught me well." Isaac studied her for a long moment, weighing her words against whatever reservations he held. Finally, he nodded. "We'll get your sisters settled first, then we'll talk about what comes next." By mid-morning, they were underway, the girls riding double on Isaac's horse, while Faith rode a sturdy pinto mare. Isaac had apparently been trailing behind his own mount. When questioned about the extra horse, he simply said it belonged to someone who won't be needing it anymore, which raised more questions than it answered. They traveled steadily through the day, stopping only to rest the horses and allow the girls to stretch their legs. Isaac proved to be remarkably gentle with Emma and Charlotte, showing them how to identify edible plants and teaching them a song he claimed cowboys sang on the trail. By late afternoon, both girls had warmed to him considerably, even smiling despite the circumstances. As dusk approached, they made camp beside a narrow stream. Faith busied herself preparing a simple meal from their meager supplies while Isaac constructed a lean-to shelter for the night. "He's nice," Charlotte whispered as she helped Faith gather kindling. "Like Pa was." Faith followed her sister's gaze to where Isaac was showing Emma how to set a rabbit snare. "Yes, he's been very kind. Are we going to stay with him?" Charlotte asked with a child's directness. Faith felt heat rise to her cheeks. "No, sweetheart. Mr. Vaughn is just helping us get to Junction City. Then he has his own business to attend to." Charlotte frowned. "But he looks at you the way Pa used to look at Ma." Before Faith could formulate a response to this startling observation, Isaac called them over. "Dinner's about ready," he announced, gesturing to where he'd managed to catch and cook 2 rabbits on improvised spits. The meal was simple but filling, and afterward, as the stars emerged overhead, Isaac told stories of his travels across the territory. He had a gift for storytelling, painting vivid pictures with his words that kept even Emma, who had been subdued since the fire, hanging on every detail. When the girls finally drifted off to sleep in the shelter, Faith and Isaac sat in companionable silence by the dying fire. "You're good with them," Faith observed quietly. Isaac poked at the embers with a stick. "Had some practice. My sister had 3 little ones before." He trailed off, his expression clouding. "Before?" Faith prompted gently. Isaac was silent for so long Faith thought he wouldn't continue. "Influenza took them all 5 winters back. My sister, her husband, their children. I was away, riding with a marshal after a gang up near the Canadian border." His voice remained steady, but Faith could hear the pain beneath the words. "By the time I got word and made it back to their homestead, they were already in the ground," Faith's heart ached for him. "I'm sorry, Isaac." He nodded once, accepting her sympathy without looking up. "Been on my own since. Took the deputy job in Helena, but the politics of it didn't sit right. Too many men getting away with too much because they knew the right people." "Men like Blackwell," Faith suggested. "Exactly like Blackwell." Isaac finally looked at her, his eyes reflecting the dying firelight. "He's been buying judges and intimidating witnesses for years. But this time he's gone too far. Because of us. Because I've been gathering evidence for months. Names, dates, witnesses willing to testify. I'm close to having enough to take to the federal marshal." He leaned forward, his voice lowering. "Your homestead wasn't random, Faith. Blackwell knows I've been watching him. Burning you out was a message to me." Faith felt cold despite the fire's proximity. How could he know that? We'd never even met before last night. Isaac hesitated. "I've been watching your place for the past week. There's a ridge with a good view of the valley. I saw all of you coming and going. Figured Blackwell's men spotted me there, assumed a connection." Faith's thoughts swirled with implications. So our home burned because of a misunderstanding. "It burned because Lane Blackwell is a greedy, evil man who'll stop at nothing to control the territory," Isaac corrected firmly. "The misunderstanding just determined the timing." Faith absorbed this, trying to make sense of how her family had become entangled in something so much larger than themselves. And now, if he thinks there's a connection between us, won't he be watching for us in Junction City? "That's why we're not taking the main trail," Isaac explained. "We're going the long way, through Miller's Pass. Few people know those trails. We'll arrive unnoticed." Faith studied him across the fire, this enigmatic man who had ridden out of the night and saved her family. "Why are you helping us, really? You could have left us at the cabin, gone after Blackwell yourself." Isaac's gaze was unwavering. "Because 20 years ago, when I was just a boy, my family's farm in Missouri burned. Raiders during the war. A stranger pulled me from the flames, but my parents didn't make it out." He looked toward the shelter where Emma and Charlotte slept. "I couldn't save them back then, but I could save your sisters." The raw honesty in his voice touched something deep within Faith. Without thinking, she reached across the space between them and placed her hand on his. "Thank you," she whispered. "Not just for saving them, but for telling me the truth." His hand turned beneath hers, his fingers closing around her own with gentle strength. For a moment, they remained connected by that simple touch, a bridge forming between their separate griefs. Then Isaac carefully withdrew his hand, clearing his throat. "We should get some rest. Dawn comes early and we've got a long ride ahead." Faith nodded, rising to her feet. "Good night, Isaac." "Good night, Faith," he replied, his eyes following her as she made her way to the shelter. Sleep came easier that night, despite the hard ground and lingering worry. In the quiet hours before dawn, Faith dreamed of fire, but also of strong arms carrying her to safety, of gray eyes that promised protection. When she woke, she found Isaac already up, brewing coffee and preparing for the day ahead. The second day of travel proved more challenging than the first. They entered rougher country, climbing steadily into the foothills where the trail narrowed and sometimes disappeared altogether. Isaac led them confidently, occasionally dismounting to check signs only he could read in the wilderness. By midday, Emma was feverish, her cough worsening. They stopped beside a small spring, and Faith bathed her sister's face with cool water while Isaac searched his saddlebags for dried herbs. "Mullein," he explained, crushing dried leaves into a cup. "Good for the lungs. My sister swore by it." Faith held the cup to Emma's lips, encouraging her to drink the bitter tea. "Were you close, you and your sister?" Isaac nodded, his expression softening with memory. 7 years older than me. More mother than sister after our parents died. Taught me most of what I know about surviving out here. She sounds remarkable, Faith said, watching as Emma drifted into a fitful sleep. She was. Isaac checked the position of the sun. We should rest here until the heat breaks. Moving her now would only make the fever worse. They made an impromptu camp. Isaac constructing a small shelter of pine boughs to shield Emma from the sun, while Charlotte helped Faith gather more water from the spring. As the afternoon wore on, Faith took the opportunity to wash some of the soot and grime from their clothing, laying the garments on sun-warmed rocks to dry. Isaac returned from scouting the trail ahead, his rifle resting easily in the crook of his arm. "All clear for now. How's she doing?" "Better," Faith replied, nodding toward where Emma slept more peacefully. "The fever's breaking, I think. Your sister's remedy seems to be working." A rare smile crossed Isaac's face. She'd be pleased to hear that. Faith hung the last of the laundry and wiped her hands on her skirt. "May I ask you something personal?" Isaac raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Why haven't you settled somewhere, started over after your loss?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. He looked away toward the distant mountains. "Never found a reason compelling enough, I suppose." After a moment, he added more quietly, "Or maybe I've just been running too long to remember how to stop." Faith understood that sentiment more than she cared to admit. After their mother's death, their father had dragged them halfway across the country, always moving, always seeking something just beyond the horizon. It wasn't until the illness took him that Faith realized they'd been running from grief all along. "What about you?" Isaac asked, turning the question back on her. "Why stay in the territory after your father passed? You could have gone east, found work in a city." "The girls," Faith answered immediately, "they've lost so much already. The cabin was the only home they remembered clearly. And—" She hesitated, searching for words to express what she felt. "There's a freedom here. Even with all the hardship, I feel more alive in these mountains than I ever did back east." Isaac's eyes held hers, a newfound understanding passing between them. "Yes," he agreed softly. "That's it exactly." Charlotte's voice interrupted the moment. "Faith, Emma's awake and asking for water." The rest of the day passed quietly. By evening, Emma was well enough to sit up and eat a small portion of the jackrabbit stew Isaac prepared. As darkness fell, Isaac took first watch while Faith and the girls slept. When he woke her for her turn standing guard, his hand lingered briefly on her shoulder, a gesture that felt both protective and somehow intimate. The third day dawned clear and cool. Emma was much improved, though still weak, and they set out at a measured pace. Isaac led them through a winding canyon that opened suddenly onto a vast meadow carpeted with wildflowers in full bloom. Charlotte gasped with delight, and even Emma smiled at the unexpected beauty. Isaac dismounted, helping the girls down so they could stretch their legs among the flowers. "It's beautiful," Faith said as she joined Isaac, watching her sisters gather small bouquets. "Found this place by accident years ago," he replied. "Was tracking a mountain lion that had been taking calves from a ranch near Junction City. Never did find the cat, but I found this instead." He glanced at her. Never showed it to anyone before. The admission warmed Faith in ways she couldn't quite explain. "Thank you for sharing it with us." They continued on after a brief rest, the trail gradually descending toward Junction City. By late afternoon, they could see smoke from chimneys in the distance, the first signs of civilization they'd encountered in days. Isaac called a halt just before they would have emerged from the tree line. "We'll wait until dusk," he decided. "Less chance of being noticed entering town." As they waited, he outlined his plan. "Mrs. Reynolds' boarding house is on the edge of town, near the livery. She's discreet and won't ask questions. You'll stay there while I make contact with some people who can help us build the case against Blackwell." Faith nodded, though a sense of foreboding had been growing within her all day. "How long will it take?" "A week, maybe 2, Isaac replied. "I need to gather the witnesses, get sworn statements." "And then what?" Faith asked. "Even if you succeed, our home is gone." Isaac's expression turned serious. "There's good land south of here, near the river. Unclaimed, better water than your old place, more shelter from the winter winds." He hesitated. "It's where I'd planned to settle someday." Faith caught her breath at the implication. "Isaac." "Just a thought," he said quickly, looking away, "for when this is over." Before Faith could respond, Charlotte called out excitedly, "Look, is that the town?" The sun was setting now, casting golden light across the valley where Junction City sprawled along the banks of a winding river. It was larger than Faith had expected, several streets lined with wooden buildings, a church steeple rising above them, and the unmistakable bustle of a growing settlement. "That's it," Isaac confirmed, helping the girls back onto his horse. "Remember what I told you, no mentioning your real names or where you're from until we're safely at Mrs. Reynolds' place." They entered town as dusk deepened into twilight, keeping to side streets and avoiding the brightly lit saloons where piano music spilled into the evening air. Mrs. Reynolds' boarding house proved to be a well-maintained two-story structure set back from the street, with a small garden and a welcoming porch. The widow herself answered Isaac's knock, a stout woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and shrewd eyes that softened considerably when she recognized him. "Isaac Vaughn," she said, her voice warm with genuine pleasure. "It's been too long." "Evening, Martha," he replied with a respectful nod. "I've come to call in that favor." Her gaze shifted to Faith and the girls, understanding immediately. "Of course. Come in, all of you. Supper's just ready and I've rooms to spare." The interior of the boarding house was clean and comfortable, smelling of fresh bread and roasting meat. Faith felt some of the tension leave her shoulders as Mrs. Reynolds ushered them into a cozy dining room where a table was already set. After introducing Faith and the girls as friends in need of discretion, Isaac pulled Mrs. Reynolds aside for a private conversation. Faith caught fragments about Blackwell and keeping them hidden, but was too focused on helping her exhausted sisters to pay close attention. When they rejoined the table, Mrs. Reynolds announced cheerfully, "You'll have the back rooms upstairs. 2 connecting bedrooms with a fine view of my garden. No other boarders at present, so you'll have the floor to yourselves." Dinner was the most substantial meal they'd had since the fire roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and apple pie still warm from the oven. Emma and Charlotte ate until they could barely keep their eyes open, and Mrs. Reynolds personally escorted them upstairs to settle in. Left alone in the dining room, Faith and Isaac sat in companionable silence until he finally spoke. "I need to go," he said quietly. "There's a man I need to see tonight, former ranch hand of Blackwell's, who's willing to testify about what he saw." Faith nodded, fighting back a sudden surge of anxiety at the thought of him leaving. "When will you return?" "Morning, if all goes well." He reached into his coat and removed a folded document, sliding it across the table. "This is a letter to Judge Hammond and Helena. If anything happens to me, get this to him. There's enough in there to start an investigation, even without the additional testimony I'm gathering." Faith's hand trembled slightly as she took the letter. "You're expecting trouble." It wasn't a question, but Isaac answered anyway. "I'm expecting Blackwell to fight back once he realizes what I'm doing. The man has a lot to lose." "Be careful," Faith said, meeting his eyes across the table. Isaac held her gaze. "I've survived this long." He stood, donning his hat. "Get some rest. You're safe here with Martha. No one will look for you in this house." At the door, he paused, turning back to her. In 3 strides, he closed the distance between them and, with uncharacteristic impulsiveness, took her hand in his. "Faith," he began, then seemed to struggle for words. "What I said earlier about the land by the river, I meant it when this is over if you wanted." Faith felt her heart quicken. "Yes, a fresh start," he finished, his thumb brushing over her knuckles, "for all of us." Before she could respond, he released her hand and was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Faith stood motionless, her hand still warm from his touch, her mind reeling with possibilities she hadn't dared consider until now. Mrs. Reynolds found her there moments later, still staring at the closed door. The older woman smiled knowingly. "That man has been wandering for years. Never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." Faith blushed. "We barely know each other." Sometimes it doesn't take long to recognize what's right. Mrs. Reynolds replied with the wisdom of experience. "Come, let me show you to your room. Your sisters are already asleep." That night, in the unfamiliar comfort of a real bed, Faith lay awake thinking of Isaac, his quiet strength, the gentleness he showed her sisters, the pain he carried, and the justice he sought. Somewhere in the dark hours, she acknowledged the truth to herself. She was falling in love with the man who had carried her sisters from the flames. Isaac didn't return the next morning as promised. By noon, Faith was pacing the boarding house, watching the street through lace curtains while Mrs. Reynolds distracted the girls with baking lessons in the kitchen. "He'll come," Mrs. Reynolds assured her as the afternoon wore on. "Isaac Vaughn's a man of his word." But evening fell with no sign of him, and Faith's worry deepened into fear. Something had gone wrong. The letter he'd given her seemed to burn in her pocket, a responsibility she hadn't asked for but couldn't ignore. After putting her sisters to bed with promises that everything was fine, Faith sought out Mrs. Reynolds in the parlor. "I need your help," she said without preamble. "Something's happened to Isaac. I need to find out what." Mrs. Reynolds set aside her knitting. "What do you have in mind? Is there someone in town, someone trustworthy, who might know where Isaac was headed last night?" The older woman considered this. "Samuel Tanner runs the livery. He and Isaac go back years, both served as scouts during the Indian campaigns." She studied Faith's determined expression. "You're not thinking of going out there yourself, are you?" "I need to know if he's in trouble," Faith replied firmly. Mrs. Reynolds sighed, recognizing the stubborn set of Faith's jaw. "Wait here." She returned shortly wearing a shawl and bonnet. "I'll go speak with Sam. Less conspicuous than you wandering around town asking questions. You stay with those girls." Faith reluctantly agreed and spent another anxious hour waiting for Mrs. Reynolds' return. When the widow finally came back, her expression was grave. "Isaac went to meet a man named Fletcher at a line cabin north of town," she reported. "Sam says Fletcher worked for Blackwell until last month, when he quit after witnessing something that troubled him deeply. Isaac was hoping Fletcher would sign a sworn statement. And," Faith prompted when Mrs. Reynolds hesitated, "and Fletcher was found dead this morning, shot through the head." She reached for Faith's hand. "There's no sign of Isaac, but there was a struggle at the cabin, blood on the floor that they don't think was Fletcher's." Faith felt the room spin momentarily. "They've taken him." "It appears so," Mrs. Reynolds agreed grimly. "But Sam also says there's a man in town, a federal marshal who arrived yesterday, named Sullivan. He's been asking discreet questions about Blackwell." Hope flared in Faith's chest. "I need to speak with him. Show him Isaac's letter." "Sam's arranged it. Sullivan will come here after dark." Mrs. Reynolds squeezed Faith's hand. "In the meantime, we need to prepare for whatever comes next." The hours until nightfall crawled by. Faith explained to her sisters only that Isaac had been delayed and that they needed to remain inside the boarding house. Emma, still recovering from her ordeal, was content to rest, but Charlotte was more observant. "Something's wrong," she declared as Faith braided her hair for bed. "You're worried about Mr. Vaughn." Faith couldn't bring herself to lie. "Yes, I am, but there's help coming. A marshal who might be able to find him." Charlotte nodded solemnly. "He'll be all right. He's brave and strong." "Yes, he is," Faith agreed, praying her sister's confidence was justified. Marshal Sullivan arrived shortly after 9 o'clock, a lean, weathered man with alert eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. After introductions, Faith handed over Isaac's letter, explaining the events of the past few days as succinctly as possible. Sullivan read the document carefully, his expression hardening. "Vaughn's been gathering this evidence for months. Names, dates, witnesses to intimidation, arson, even murder." He looked up at Faith. "This is enough to bring Blackwell in for questioning, but without the witnesses themselves." "You think they're targeting the witnesses," Faith concluded. "Fletcher's murder suggests as much." Sullivan folded the letter and tucked it into his coat. "And if they've taken Vaughn, it's because he knows where to find the others." "What will they do to him?" Faith asked, dreading the answer. Sullivan didn't sugarcoat it. They'll try to make him talk. When he doesn't, they'll kill him. He stood, straightening his coat. But they won't do it quickly. Blackwell likes to make examples. We have time, but not much. What's your plan? Faith asked, rising to face him. I know Blackwell's main ranch is about 20 miles east of town, Sullivan replied. If they've taken Vaughn anywhere, it's there. I'll ride out at first light with the local sheriff and some deputies. I'm coming with you, Faith stated, her tone brooking no argument. Sullivan's eyebrows rose. This isn't a job for a young woman, Miss O'Connor. Isaac saved my sister's lives, Faith countered. He risked everything to help us. I won't sit here waiting while he might be dying. She met the marshal's gaze unflinchingly. Besides, I can shoot, and I know what Blackwell's men look like from the night they burned our cabin. Sullivan studied her for a long moment, then gave a reluctant nod. Be ready at dawn. Wear something practical and bring whatever weapon you have. After the marshal left, Faith found Mrs. Reynolds waiting in the hallway. I heard, the widow said. I'll look after your sisters. You do what needs doing. Faith embraced the older woman gratefully. Thank you. Just bring him back, Mrs. Reynolds replied softly. That man deserves someone to come home to. Faith barely slept that night, her mind filled with images of Isaac in danger, in pain, needing her. She rose before dawn, dressed in her sturdiest skirt and boots, and braided her hair tightly back from her face. From her father's old possessions that Isaac had salvaged from the cabin, she retrieved a well-maintained Remington revolver. After checking on her still sleeping sisters and leaving them a note explaining her absence, Faith slipped downstairs to find Mrs. Reynolds already awake, a bundle of food prepared for her journey. The marshal's waiting at the livery, she said, pressing the package into Faith's hands. God go with you both. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten as Faith joined Marshal Sullivan and 4 other men at the livery stable. Sullivan introduced her only as Miss Faith, who has business with Blackwell's men, which the others accepted without question. Sheriff Wilson and his deputies, Sullivan explained as they mounted up. Good men who want to see justice done. They rode out of town as the first rays of sunlight crested the mountains, taking a direct route toward Blackwell's ranch. Sullivan outlined their approach as they rode. We'll stop short of the main house and scout the situation, he told Faith. There's a line of hills that offers good cover about a half-mile out. From there, we can determine where they might be holding Vaughn. Faith nodded, her throat too tight with anxiety to speak. She focused instead on the rhythm of her horse beneath her, the weight of the revolver at her waist, and the growing resolve in her heart to find Isaac no matter what it took. They rode steadily for hours, crossing open range and following the winding path of a creek that would lead them to Blackwell's sprawling ranch. By mid-morning, Sullivan signaled a halt as they approached a ridge overlooking a wide valley. Blackwell's place is just beyond those trees, he said, gesturing toward a distant grove. We'll approach on foot from here. Leaving their horses secured in a sheltered draw, the party crept forward along the ridge until they had a clear view of the ranch below. Faith's breath caught at the sight a massive main house surrounded by numerous outbuildings, corrals filled with horses, and dozens of men moving about the property. Bigger operation than I expected, Sheriff Wilson muttered. Must be 20 men down there. Sullivan studied the layout through a small spyglass. Looking for anywhere they might hold a prisoner, needs to be secure but private. Faith scanned the buildings, trying to think like Blackwell would. There, she said suddenly, pointing to a stone structure set apart from the other buildings. That looks different from the rest. Solid walls, small windows. Sullivan trained his glass on the building. Good eye, that's their storehouse, built like a fortress to keep out raiders. He continued his observation. 2 guards at the door, more security than you'd need for supplies. That's where they're keeping him, Faith stated with certainty. Sullivan lowered the spyglass, his expression grim. Likely so, but getting to him won't be easy with so many of Blackwell's men around. What about a distraction? One of the deputies suggested. Sullivan considered this. Might work. We could start a commotion at the far end of the property, draw most of them away. I'll get Isaac out. Faith volunteered immediately. All 4 men turned to her with expressions ranging from surprise to outright objection. Absolutely not, Sullivan began, but Faith cut him off. I'm smaller and faster than any of you, she argued. While you're creating the distraction, I can slip in with less chance of being noticed, and if Isaac is injured, it might take more than one person to get him out. Sheriff Wilson shook his head. It's too dangerous, miss. More dangerous than what Isaac is enduring right now because he tried to help my family, Faith challenged. This is my fight, too. Sullivan studied her for a long moment, then gave a reluctant nod. She has a point, and we're short-handed as it is. He turned to the others. Sheriff, you and your men create the distraction. Something big enough to draw attention but not so destructive as to endanger innocent ranch hands. A fire in one of the empty corrals should do it. He turned back to Faith. You and I will circle around to the storehouse. When the commotion starts, we move in. But you follow my lead exactly, understood? No heroics. Faith nodded, relief and fear coursing through her in equal measure. Understood. They spent the next hour observing the ranch's routines and planning their approach. As the sun reached its zenith, they separated the sheriff and his deputies circling wide to approach from the north, while Faith and Sullivan made their way through a shallow ravine that would bring them closer to the storehouse. The wait for the distraction seemed interminable. Crouched behind a stack of lumber not 50 yards from the storehouse, Faith could see the 2 guards clearly now bored-looking men with rifles slung casually over their shoulders. Remember, Sullivan whispered, when it starts, we wait until most of the men have moved away. Then we approach from behind the building. There's a small window on the back wall. If we're lucky, we might be able to see inside before making our move. Faith nodded, her hand resting on the revolver at her waist. The weight of it was reassuring, a connection to her father who had taught her to shoot when she was barely 12. Suddenly, shouts erupted from the far side of the ranch, followed by the unmistakable glow of fire. Men began running toward the commotion, including one of the storehouse guards. The second remained at his post, but his attention was clearly divided, his gaze constantly shifting toward the growing chaos. Now, Sullivan murmured, and they moved swiftly around the perimeter of the clearing, keeping to the shadows until they reached the rear of the stone building. The window Sullivan had mentioned was small and set high in the wall, but a stack of empty crates provided enough height for Faith to peer inside. What she saw made her blood run cold. Isaac was there, tied to a chair in the center of the room. His face was bruised and bloodied, his shirt torn and stained crimson in several places. But he was alive, his chest rising and falling with each labored breath. A man stood before him, tall and expensively dressed, with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to power. Even without having seen him before, Faith knew instinctively this was Lane Blackwell himself. He's inside, Faith whispered to Sullivan, who had positioned himself at the corner of the building to watch for approaching threats. With Blackwell, they've hurt him badly. Sullivan's expression hardened. One guard left at the front. I'll take care of him. When I give the signal, come around to the front entrance. Before Faith could respond, Sullivan was moving, circling toward the distracted guard with the silent efficiency of a predator. Faith watched as he approached from behind and, with a swift movement, struck the man at the base of his skull with the butt of his pistol. The guard crumpled without a sound. Sullivan waved Faith forward, and together they entered the storehouse, weapons drawn. The scene inside froze at their entrance. Blackwell, turning with surprise, etched on his aristocratic features. A younger man beside him reaching for a holstered pistol. And Isaac, raising his head with difficulty, his eyes widening at the sight of Faith. Federal Marshal, Sullivan announced, his gun trained steadily on Blackwell. You're under arrest, Blackwell, for kidnapping, attempted murder, and a list of other charges that will keep you occupied for years to come. Blackwell's surprise gave way to cold calculation. Marshal Sullivan. I was wondering when you'd make an appearance, though I must say your backup is unexpected." His gaze lingered on Faith with obvious dismissal. "Don't move, either of you," Sullivan warned as the younger man's hand hovered near his weapon. "Miss Faith, see to Mr. Vaughn while I secure these two." Faith hurried to Isaac's side, her heart pounding at the extent of his injuries up close. His left eye was swollen shut, his lip split, and dark bruises mottled his jawline. But his right eye focused on her with astonishing clarity. "Faith," he whispered, his voice rough, "you shouldn't be here." "Hush," she replied, working at the ropes binding his wrists. "Of course I should." Behind them, Sullivan was ordering Blackwell and his companion to place their hands on their heads while he retrieved restraints from his coat pocket. The distraction outside continued, with shouting and the sounds of chaos growing louder. Just as Faith freed Isaac's hands, the storehouse door burst open again. A burly man with a distinctive limp, one of the men Faith remembered from the night of the fire, stood framed in the doorway, taking in the scene with a quick glance before raising his rifle. Everything happened in a blur. Sullivan turned, his revolver swinging toward the new threat. The younger man beside Blackwell seized the opportunity to draw his own weapon. Faith saw it all unfolding as if in slow motion. Without hesitation, she drew her father's Remington and fired at the man in the doorway just as he was taking aim at Sullivan. Her shot caught him in the shoulder, spinning him sideways and sending his rifle clattering to the floor. Sullivan, meanwhile, had ducked behind a stack of crates as the younger man fired, the bullet splintering wood where the marshal had stood a moment before. Sullivan returned fire, his shot catching the man in the arm and causing him to drop his weapon with a cry of pain. Blackwell, seeing his advantage disappearing, lunged for a shotgun mounted on the wall. Isaac, despite his injuries, surged from the chair and tackled the older man, both of them crashing to the floor in a tangle of limbs. Faith rushed to help, but Isaac had already gained the upper hand, pressing Blackwell face down with a knee in his back despite the obvious pain the exertion caused him. "It's over, Blackwell," Isaac growled, his voice stronger now. "You're finished." Sullivan quickly secured both the wounded men, then helped Isaac bind Blackwell with the very ropes that had held him captive. Outside, the commotion had changed character. The sheriff's voice could be heard calling for Blackwell's men to stand down. As the immediate danger passed, Faith turned her full attention to Isaac's injuries, helping him to sit on a nearby crate while she examined the worst of the cuts. "You came for me," he said quietly, his good eye searching her face. "Of course I did," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "Did you think I wouldn't?" A ghost of a smile touched his battered lips. "Hoped you might, didn't dare believe it." Before she could respond, Sullivan approached, having secured their prisoners. Sheriffs got control outside. Blackwell's foreman surrendered when he realized what was happening. He looked at Isaac with concern. "Can you ride? We need to get you back to town." Isaac nodded, though Faith could see the movement cost him. "I'll manage." "I'll help him," Faith assured Sullivan, already positioning herself under Isaac's arm to support him as he stood. They emerged from the storehouse into bright afternoon sunlight. The fire that had served as their distraction had been contained to a single empty corral, and Blackwell's men were being disarmed and gathered in the central yard under the watchful eyes of the deputies. Sheriff Wilson approached, relief evident on his face. "Glad to see you in one piece, Vaughn, more or less." Isaac acknowledged the greeting with a nod. "Good timing, Sheriff." "Thank the lady," Wilson replied with a respectful glance at Faith. "She spotted where they were keeping you and insisted on being part of the rescue." Isaac's arm tightened around Faith's shoulders. "Seems I owe you my life, Miss O'Connor." Faith felt her cheeks warm under his gaze. "Consider it payment for my sister's lives." The journey back to Junction City was slow and difficult. Isaac refused to be separated from Faith, insisting on riding double with her despite Sullivan's offer of his own mount. Though he never complained, Faith could feel the tension in his body with every jolt and sway of the horse. They arrived in town after nightfall, a procession that drew curious onlookers despite the late hour. Blackwell and his men were taken directly to the jail, while Faith guided Isaac to Mrs. Reynolds' boarding house, where the widow was waiting anxiously on the porch. "Lord above, Mrs." Reynolds exclaimed when she saw Isaac's condition. "Bring him inside right away. I've hot water ready and clean bandages." With her help, Faith got Isaac settled in a downstairs bedroom that Mrs. Reynolds had prepared. The older woman proved to be skilled with medicinal herbs and healing techniques, cleaning and binding Isaac's wounds with gentle efficiency. "3 cracked ribs, by my reckoning," she announced after her examination. "Cuts and bruises aplenty, but nothing that won't heal with time and care." She patted Isaac's shoulder gently. "You've had worse and lived to tell the tale." Isaac managed a smile despite his discomfort. "Thanks to Faith, I'll live to tell this one too." Mrs. Reynolds exchanged a knowing look with Faith. "I'll leave you two for a bit. There's broth warming on the stove when he's ready for it." When they were alone, Faith took the chair beside the bed, suddenly uncertain what to say now that the immediate crisis had passed. Isaac broke the silence. "Your sisters." "Upstairs, sleeping," Faith assured him. "Charlotte's been asking for you. She'll be overjoyed to know you're safe." Isaac reached for her hand, his movements careful but determined. "Faith, what you did today." "Anyone would have done the same," she demurred. "No," he countered firmly, "not anyone." Most would have taken that letter to the marshal and stayed safely behind. His fingers tightened around hers. "You're either the bravest or the most foolhardy woman I've ever met." Faith couldn't help but smile. "Perhaps a bit of both." Isaac's expression turned serious. "When they had me in that storehouse, asking questions I wouldn't answer, I kept thinking about you and the girls, about that land by the river." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "It gave me strength to hold on." Faith felt tears well in her eyes. "Isaac." "I know it's sudden," he continued, his voice low and intense. "We've known each other less than a week, but out here, life doesn't always give you the luxury of time." His thumb traced patterns on her palm. "I've wandered for years, Faith. Never staying anywhere, never letting myself put down roots. But when I look at you, I see a future I want to be part of." Faith's heart soared at his words, yet caution made her hesitate. "What about Blackwell? Will he face justice?" "With the evidence we have now, yes." Isaac's confidence was unwavering. Sullivan already had a strong case. Add kidnapping a former deputy and torture to the charges, witnessed by a federal marshal. Blackwell's finished. Faith nodded, relief washing through her. "And afterward? What then?" Isaac's gaze held hers steadily. "That depends on you." "On me?" Faith echoed. "That land by the river," Isaac said softly. "It's good land, room for a house, room for your sisters to grow and thrive." He took a breath, wincing slightly at the pain in his ribs. "Room for us if you wanted that." Faith felt tears spill down her cheeks, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "I do want that," she whispered. "Very much." Isaac's face lit with a smile that transformed him despite the bruises. "Then that's what we'll build, together." Gently, mindful of his injuries, Faith leaned forward and pressed her lips to his in a kiss that held all the promise of their future. When she drew back, Isaac's good eye was bright with emotion. "I love you, Faith O'Connor," he said simply. "Have from the moment I saw you standing brave in the face of tragedy, thinking only of your sisters." "And I love you, Isaac Vaughn," she replied, the words feeling right and true in her heart. "The man who carried my sisters from the flames and brought light back into our lives." In the weeks that followed, Junction City buzzed with the news of Lane Blackwell's arrest and the subsequent revelations of his crimes. With Isaac's testimony and the evidence Sullivan had gathered, the case against the cattle baron was overwhelming. Additional witnesses, emboldened by Blackwell's imprisonment, came forward with their own accounts of intimidation and violence. Isaac's recovery was slow but steady. Under Faith's care and Mrs. Reynolds' remedies, his wounds healed and his strength returned. By the time the first snowfall dusted the mountains, he was able to ride again, taking Faith to see the land by the river he had spoken of. It was everything he had promised: a gentle slope, overlooking a clear, swift stream, sheltered by tall pines and open to the morning sun. Faith stood in what would become their front yard, envisioning the home they would build. "It's perfect," she told Isaac, who watched her with undisguised adoration. "Not yet," he replied, taking her hand, "but it will be." They were married on Christmas Day in Junction City's small church, with Charlotte and Emma as their attendants, and Mrs. Reynolds beaming proudly from the front pew. Marshal Sullivan made a special trip from Helena to attend, bringing news that Blackwell had been sentenced to 20 years in the territorial prison. By spring, the foundation of their new home was taking shape, built with the help of neighbors and friends who had rallied around the couple whose courage had freed the valley from Blackwell's shadow. Faith planted a garden while Isaac and a crew of local men raised the walls of what would become a spacious cabin overlooking the river. On warm evenings, they would sit together on a makeshift bench, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Emma and Charlotte, flourishing in their new home, would chase fireflies in the meadow or help Faith prepare dinner over the outdoor fire. "Did you ever imagine this?" Faith asked one such evening as they watched the girls laughing in the twilight. "A year ago, when you were tracking Blackwell's men, did you picture this life?" Isaac's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Never dared to dream this big," he admitted. "Thought justice would be enough. Never considered I might find love and a family too." Faith leaned into his embrace, remembering the night that had brought them together, the terror of the fire, the stranger emerging from the flames with her sisters in his arms. From tragedy had come a love stronger than either of them could have imagined, a future brighter than the flames that had forged their bond. "Sometimes," she mused, "the things that seem like endings are really beginnings in disguise." Isaac pressed a kiss to her temple. "This is just our beginning, Faith. The best is yet to come." And as the first stars appeared overhead, Faith knew with absolute certainty that he was right. Their story, born in fire and tested by adversity, was far from over. The best chapters filled with love, family, and the home they were building together were still being written. One day at a time, in the wild and beautiful land they now called home.